Hey, how's it going, everyone? And welcome back to our NOS4A2 after show recap show. We're bringing it back for season 2 because we just had such a good time talking about it in season 1. But I am one of your hosts, Griffin Schiller, and I'm joined by my good friend and colleague, Mr. Mike Johnson of Real School. Mike, how's it going?
Not bad, man. Excited about this. I think we're very honest when it came to the first season. We were
Yeah.
perfectly honest, I think. So excited to talk about this season. Wasn't too sure if we'd even have a second season, but here we are. So yeah, excited about it.
Yeah, I gotta be honest. You and I were chatting. We were like, I'm a little nervous. I don't know if this is gonna happen. Did the model of releasing the full season for like AMC premium members, did the gamble pay off? Were enough people tuning in week to week? And I guess enough people were tuning in week to week because here we have a second season, which I know we're both excited to dive into it. We're fans of the book based off of, or sorry, the show based off of the book by Joe Hill, and such. And so I'm really curious to see what they're gonna take from the source material, how they're gonna change it up and whatnot. And I'm just looking forward to spending more time with these characters because season 1 we got a nice taste of the kind of people that they are, and then so as sophomore seasons usually do, it's a great time to open it up and really dive deep into the psyche of who these individuals are. And as you'll see in the first 2 episodes of the season, we have, full disclosure, we have screened possibly up to 5 episodes at this point. I have no idea when you guys are all watching this, but we have gotten screeners for the season, and we have seen at least the first 2 episodes, and you really can't talk about one without the other, although we're going to do that in this instance because I have no idea if you guys are getting 2 episodes or 1, but I'm assuming you're getting 1. But yeah, season 2 episode 1, they're great season 2 episode 1 and season 2 episode 2 are great companion pieces, and it just right off the bat you really feel that this show is going in a more character driven direction. It definitely did last season, but this season especially they're doubling down on it, and the season really hits the ground running, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Hits the ground running in a different direction. I think I like the way you put that. And I think if you'll allow, we can also tease the fact that we just spoke with showrunner and creator Jamie O'Brien and interviewed her. There you go.
Who knows?
And interviewed her about the second season, what to expect, and everything like that. And she had said exactly what you'd said. It is a very character-driven show, and that is where they hit their stride with the first episode. So. Yeah, it's one of those episodes that I think we discussed last season where we had said it is a very well-paced show. I think overall we can agree on that because
there were some hiccups last season, I would say. I think it took a little bit to get into what exactly was happening with the first season, I will say, which is why I think I just immediately was like, okay, we've gotten all the backstory, all the coming of age shit out of the way. We can just literally focus on these characters and the current struggles that are going on. We don't have to explain this. We know everyone's mission and end game, and that's exactly what they do in this first episode.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's important right off the bat to mention that there is an 8-year gap. There is another time jump. AMC loves this new technique. They did it with Walking Dead, and now they're, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, let's jump 8 years in the future. So we do see slightly different versions of the characters. It predominantly focuses, especially in the first episode, on Vic. And so we see what these 8 years have really done to her, and they have definitely taken their toll. And so we see a much more dark version of her, or we see more of the darkness that we saw in the first season. Definitely see more of the damage. Definitely see, I think what you and I agreed is probably the strength of the first episode, which was she now mirrors a lot more of who her father was in the first season.
Yeah, immediately. I mean, she's hiding little, shooters of liquor and stuff like that. She's obviously suffering trauma. She's still, even though Manx is dead, when the news comes out that Manx is dead, she's not 100% convinced. She's like, no, that's not possible. He can't die. And so it's like, it's the fact that he might still be alive that is really tormenting her throughout the entirety of this episode. And I assume that's going to be the case throughout the rest of this season, is just like, obviously her on the mission, she has to make sure that Charlie Manx is dead. And so, yeah, I mean, you see the obsession, you see in a lot of ways, she mirrors both her mother and her father. Her dad was the alcoholic, the substance abuser, but he was great with her. And you see that with her own child, Wayne, or I guess his name was Bruce Wayne, because they like to name things after comic book characters. And, he is obviously the son of Craig from the last season, who died. Poor Craig, really just hung out to dry, man. That poor guy. And so she's grappling with motherhood, hence the title of the episode, Bad Mother. Which is a very apt title, and another reason why it's a great companion piece or counterpart to the second episode, which is titled Good Father, and deals with, you guessed it, Charlie Manx and Millie Manx, but we won't get into that just yet. So she's got the substance abuse problems, but she tries to be a good mother to her son. But at the same time, it's like when the trauma starts kicking in, then the obsession and the controlling sort of nature of her mother really starts to become apparent as well. And so it's like while she's a good person, she's the hero of this story, she's incredibly flawed, and she's taken the worst elements of the two people who raised her and it's kind of seeped their way into her subconscious, and it's the case where it's like it probably would have happened even if this encounter with Manx didn't happen, because she already had a troubled background. I mean, granted, the person she loved most wouldn't have died. She wouldn't be tormented by this guy, but she would probably be tormented by the mistakes of her parents and those vices or those the less desirable character traits would have definitely found their way into her.
Yeah, and they have. I mean, in a lot of ways, right? And
sure, yeah.
I think we discussed this a little bit. We both were huge fans of Ashleigh Cummings in the first season. We think she carried it as she needed to. So it's impressive when you consider the fact that she's the opposite, the polar end of Zachary Quinto's performance, which is just as delicious and evil and twisted as we want it to be. This episode, I had a little bit of a problem believing some of the things that she was going through, which kind of mirrors what I had said in the first season as well, is that when she got to that darker stuff, I was kind of like, okay, so I feel that Ashleigh Cummings, the person, perhaps hasn't actually gone through, and hopefully not, things like this, just in terms of the personal pain, right? And obviously she hasn't battled an immortal succubus in real life, but it's, that as an actor, she had a little bit more maturing to do. And I say that as a middle-aged guy. And basically what, I saw in this first episode kind of mirrored that again for me. Huge fan of her. And you can tell she's trying, not like she's forcing, but no,
it's very natural. Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, there was still something about it that even that 8-year gap, I didn't even buy. And you and I were discussing this last night.
That was
that's
there's
a little bit of an
8-year
issue.
gap. Yeah. It's one of those things where, and you brought this up, so I'll defer to you. But you were saying that it's a show that in a lot of instances it's right there. It's one step away from being great. And we love the show. Obviously, we think it's a really fun, solid watch. Great summer entertainment, I would add. But there are instances, there are peaks where the show does hit that greatness, and you see that in episode 2. But then there are times where it's just right there. It's so close. And I think while I understand and appreciate the sentiment behind the 8-year gap, it's the characters don't necessarily, at least the protagonists don't necessarily feel like they've gone through 8 years worth of change. It feels like we're in a sense just picking back up maybe a couple of months or a year later.
100%. Yes. I think this also stems just from my personal experience as a high school teacher during the day, that I understand. I've worked with teenagers for quite a bit of my life, and she still has that vibe, that young person vibe. I shouldn't say a teenager. She doesn't seem that young. But as I had mentioned to you, a lot of stuff happens from the time you're 17, like she was in the first season, to the time you're 25. And a lot of things have happened to Vic, obviously, in terms of her love life and her becoming a mother and all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't quite grounded yet. And that's important. Yeah. And, that's crucial because we are talking about the first episode of this second season. And so it's a little unfortunate, in my opinion, that they didn't get a little more of that grounded nature, or perhaps that they didn't explore this a little later. So we didn't have an opportunity to ask Jamie O'Brien why they made that conscious decision of let's go 8 years. I think it has a lot to do with Wayne, because Jamie had mentioned that, the child is now of an age that Charlie Manx would take. And so, something like that is coming. But to not have the middle ground, even like you said, if we could push it a year or even 2 years in the future, we give these characters a little bit more of an opportunity, and we give the actors more of an opportunity to get it under their skin. And then maybe, fingers crossed, if they had a third season, that would be a perfect opportunity, because I think it mirrors that other AMC show I mentioned. Because if you think of Chandler Biggs, who played Carl, in Walking Dead, that kid grew up really fast. And I mean that both as the character and Chandler Biggs. So that maturity kind of needs to marinate a little bit more just for it to be believable. Now, I'm saying all of this about a show that centers on an immortal succubus and an evil haunted car. So you take it with a grain of salt.
Listen, you say that, but it's a show that is rooted in real world character drama. Like, these are real things that people go through. There are people who come from abusive upbringings. There are people who deal with life-threatening trauma or abuse, assault, all that type of stuff. There are people who desperately want like a sense of belonging, and whatnot. And there are people who resent parental figures. Like, it's everything that the show tackles feels realistic, and it's the the fantasy, the horror, the heightened elements that come into play that really enhance the real world drama, which is why it's, again, we keep saying this, the show is at its best when it's focusing on the characters in their struggle and not overtly the horror. You use the horror to accent the character drama and what's going on. And I think this is a show that actually does that quite well. So, like, having a gripe with saying, like, okay, listen, I buy into it to an extent, but to another extent, it does feel like kids forcing maturity onto themselves too soon. It's like, I get that, and I think it makes sense, and it is apt in this first episode. Now, it's not always the case. There are plenty of instances where I think I do buy into the struggle and what's not. I especially like the sequence when Vic and Wayne are Wayne plays hooky with her, and they have a lot of bonding. And I bought into, like, I think that she is a good mother, but she is letting her trauma and her past kind of drag her down into making the same mistakes that her parents did. So it's like, you see there are flashes of stuff where I buy into it, but then there's like there's the instance with Lou and his character, who I think actually has an interesting hurdle to overcome, which is believing that he is good enough for Vic, because he doesn't. And it's very obvious that he doesn't. I think he's a great support system for her. I do buy into that sort of their family dynamic and the relationship between the two of them. But I mean, there's an insecurity there where it's like he thinks that she's like unobtainable, which is obviously just ridiculous, and it's an issue that obviously we're gonna have to see him grapple with the entirety of the season. But you were saying that when we first got Lou, you weren't really buying into the character too much.
It was, it was the first season. Lou had something that's a little systematic, or symptomatic of the writing overall, which is I felt that a lot of these characters, when they're first introduced, and I say a lot because there are definitely exceptions, are merely plot devices. Maggie was the biggest example of that in the first season. We even got to the point where we explored her character a little bit, and she had that episode pretty much strictly about her, where I kind of felt, well, this is a little too late at this point in this season, that I would have appreciated having that kind of depth with her earlier, so that she felt like a real character. So we were invested. Lou is kind of the same way. Lou pops in late in the last season, and now he's an integral part, right? It's bound to happen, but there wasn't any investment. But having said that, as much as I didn't buy the Lou character, or didn't know his importance, I think is a better way of putting it, this episode kind of solves that. And kudos to the actor who plays Lou, because about halfway through this episode, man, does that guy turn it around. And
oh yeah, he really does. Yeah.
There's a brilliant moment where he becomes a very real character, and you understand everything he's going through. And then I was like, now I'm invested. So, kudos. Maybe they are turning it around in a little bit, or maybe it just took that much time.
Well, and I think a little bit of why you felt that may have been because they do have to transition him a little bit. Like we can't just pick up in season 2 and have him be a completely different person. We have to kind of remember, there has to be some semblance of who that person was. And we definitely get that at the beginning of this episode. And then you're right, there comes a point where that changes, and it's like, okay, this is who he's going to be now for the rest of this season, and like we can buy into this person, and so I think maybe it was needed. Maybe they did need to just kind of like tap into season 1 Lou a little bit to get to where he is towards the end of this episode. Yeah, very true. So we should mention, though, that the other half of this episode that carries on this the second episode is Bing. So we get to see what's happening with him. And, it is that kind of counterbalance that I was already talking about, that we have the character-driven piece when we're following Vic's story, and then we get the supernatural. And like you had mentioned, there's disbelief of whether or not Charlie Manx is actually dead. But then we see Bing kind of all cleaned up, right? Very proper looking, very like John Wayne. Serial killer.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
And he finds NOS4A2. He finds the car. And of course, some idiot, being an artist too, which is funny, some artist is making it an installation. So he's refurbishing the car and bringing Manx back to life. And that's all I want to say about this one. I don't want to spoil it too much, but yeah, that was a key
spoil
part.
Season 1. Wait, spoil episode 1 or episode 2?
A little of both.
We can spoil episode 1, man.
All right. We see a little bit of. We know that Charlie's obviously going to make a comeback. We know that Charlie's coming back.
You see the trailers. He comes back. He does.
That's a good point. Yeah, you probably knew at some point Zachary Quinto was going to pop into an episode once in a while, but yeah. So it's just one of those things, and I kind of appreciated that. It's weird because as a former writer, I look at it and I think to myself, they could have once again just held that back until the second episode, like not even hinted at it. But I think that balance in the first episode was key because it was really the storyline that I was invested in. That, like I had mentioned,
the Bing one.
Yes, because the stuff with Vic, I was like, take it or leave it. But yeah, with Bing, I was like, okay, now I'm into it. And it's interesting too because he picks up right where he left off in the first season, where he's just it's a good performance because it is super creepy, but there's this innocence about him. There's, and this is what's great about this show, because you can say aspects are great about this show for sure, is the balance they find between sympathetic and twisted. And everybody's got a dark side and everybody's got a light side. And that, stems from Joe Hill's original writing. But I think the show has done very well to balance that. You can actually feel like Manx has a point with some of the stuff he does, not everything. Same thing with Bing. You kind of sympathize with him. And then there's some episodes where you just go, this guy is a monster. So kudos to the writing team and the performers for all of that.
Well, and then he has the little the exchange with the guy's son,
Right.
And then there's a connection there, and I want that connection to be explored throughout the season. You know, maybe Bing finds his purpose and is redeemed. I say redeemed. I mean, he's a pretty horrible person. Maybe we don't want him redeemed, but you know, if anyone's going to get redeemed, he would probably be the likely candidate. But then he's redeemed through like becoming a mentor and a father figure to this kid. Right.
Yeah.
That he saw a lot of himself in, and so, yeah, I don't know. I think, yeah, again, like last season, I think my favorite episodes were the Bing centric arcs. They were just, not only because I just loved Olafsson's performance, but like they just. I don't know. It was the most interesting material to kind of sink our teeth into. It was just like, here's a guy who is like, in a way, he's kind of like Manx. He doesn't see himself as the villain. He sees himself doing these things because he believes in them, right? Because he wants to go to a place where he's accepted and can be a kid, because he was robbed of his childhood and parental figures who, you know, despised him. So, yeah, for sure. Well, and I guess we should mention Maggie, because we do get Maggie a little bit in this episode. Not a whole lot, but what we do see is that Maggie is in a relationship now with the FBI agent. I forget her name. Do you remember her name?
No, we had this problem last season too. Oh, Tabitha.
Tabitha. Yes,
right.
She came in very, very late last season. So it was like one of those. But yeah, so it's great because we see her thriving, and she has that you know, that simple domestic life, that companionship that she's always really been yearning for. And we get a sense of like her and Vic's relationship, where it is now, how 8 years has really affected that. And it seems like Vic only wants to call her when she needs to just talk about, you know, suffering from trauma and stuff. And so it's a really kind of a one-way relationship. And so, you know, they deal with that, but then also the fact that she's given up using her knife and her abilities. She's just kind of like put that away, because every time she uses it, it comes with a cost, and we see that because she uses her tiles to determine whether or not Manx is dead, and her tiles tell her yes. And after that happens, she suffers a seizure. That's kind of where that episode left off, a little bit of a cliffhanger. But I don't know. What do you think is going to happen with Maggie this season? I feel like they have to do something interesting with her.
I hope she joins the fight more. That's all I'm going to say, because you know, I forget the term of what they use. What these people were called. These people
strong creatives.
Strong creatives. Thank you. Yeah, because you know, she was the guide. She's in a sense kind of the Yoda or Morpheus for Vic. So as much as, you know, she might not be a fighter, you know, in that sense, like her powers can't necessarily do anything. I just feel like she needs to kind of be invested in this fight a little bit more. If you're going to bring our hero into the world, well, you got to be able to do something. Or, having said that, if you follow the archetype, she'll probably sacrifice herself at one point.
Yeah.
Yet I feel that would be very fitting for Maggie, because she is, you know, as much as I have said she's a bit of a tool. That sounded terrible. Tool within the story. Yes. A story device. That she's still sympathetic. I mean, you know what? You still like her, right? So
yeah, and going back to, you know, you talking about her solo episode last season, I loved that episode because it actually gave us more insight into who she is, and it's like I want to see more of like what she's going through, you know? Yeah.
Well, hopefully they do that too. But I think you and I know, because having a sneak peek into further episodes, that they don't necessarily do that in the first half of this season or first few episodes. So again, we know it's 10 episodes. You know, they're tight for time. We kind of get the impression too that they're going to focus a little bit more on Miss Millie, right? So we're going to focus more on Manx's daughter, which I liked, because again, that dark twisted thing is kind of why I like the show anyways. So yeah, who knows? I really hope that Maggie doesn't fall behind once again. And so, and I get the impression like it might be the same with Lou. Like we're just going to get these characters who don't get their moment to shine once again.
I disagree with Lou because I think that he's so intertwined with Vic that it'll be like he honestly might get more progression than Maggie. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of characters to balance here, but they can do it if they do it right.
Yeah.
But I think the focal point of this season is going to be as it was last season and whatnot. It will be Manx and Vic.
Right.
And Vic is on a mission to kill Charlie Manx. Manx is on a mission to abduct children and live forever. So
who will win?
Yeah, who will win? That's really what it comes down to. And what do you all think? That's really the most important question because we want to hear about all your thoughts and opinions on NOS4A2 Season 2, Episode 1 down in the comments section below. If you watched Season 1 and are on to Season 2 now, what were your thoughts on Season 1? Did you enjoy it? And do you think that Season 2 is already heading in a bigger and better direction? Again, we want to have an open dialogue and open conversation down in the comments section below. But Mr. Mike Johnson, thank you so much for joining me. Where can everyone find you?
You can find me Real School, REEL School on all the major social media, especially YouTube. And you can find me right here because I like to collaborate with Griffin quite often. So
he'll be back. We'll be back for our interview with showrunner of NOS4A2, Jamie O'Brien. That should be up. If it's not up now, it will be up either tomorrow or the day after. Who knows? But that was a really fun one, so you can keep an eye out for that. So if you don't want to miss that, be sure to subscribe to the FilmSpeak channel, where we like to say the conversation continues after the credits, and this is a perfect example of that because we're still talking about the show and the credits have most definitely rolled. So if you want to be a part of that conversation, consider subscribing to the channel for more insight, analysis, and interviews behind your favorite movies and television shows. You can also like FilmSpeak on Facebook, follow us on Twitter simply by searching FilmSpeak, and if you like me specifically and you like what I have to say, you can give me a follow on Twitter at Griff Schiller. All right. Thanks for joining us, guys, and we will catch you next week. Take care. NOS4A2.